For Chapter 24, we're going to be looking at the purchasing process. So even in the first few sentences of this chapter in your book, it talks about how this is a highly specialized process, and this, there are whole books about purchasing, and we're just covering this in one chapter. So we're obviously not going to talk about everything that relates to the purchasing process. But let's go over some of the overviews and some basics that you can expect if you are involved in the purchasing process at your operation. So some things that you need to think about when deciding which products to purchase. So really we need to purchase quality products, but this doesn't always mean that we're going to purchase the most expensive or the highest quality product available. Really, we're going to purchase items where the quality meets our needs for what we're doing with it and our budget. The relationship between quality and price then is what we consider a good value or a bad value. So when something is high quality and a good price, that is considered a good value to us. But even if something's maybe a good quality but a really high out of our range price, that's probably still not a good value to our organization. So all of those things need to be taken into consideration. We also are going to look at quantity. Obviously the amount that we need to buy. A lot of things are cheaper in bulk, and this can be a great option, especially for shelf-stable things, dry goods. But is bulk always better? And the answer to that is, not if you're not going to use it. So make sure when you're looking at quantity, you're really looking at what's going to be used inside your operation. We probably have all went through that on our own at the grocery store, etc. Where something was cheaper if we bought a bigger size and we bought it and then we didn't end up using it all and it went to waste. And so obviously we want to avoid those kinds of operations. We don't want to waste food, but we also don't want to incur extra cost to our organization then, because we're not utilizing all of that extra product. So keep that in mind when you think about the quantity that's needed, what units is it sold in, etc. Obviously, price is really important. We normally have a budget that we have to stick to, and so price really tends to be a big thing that we focus on when we're looking at purchasing, especially comparing, the same product or a similar product between different vendors. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but typically they look at a prime vendor or one vendor, delivering most of your items as far as leading to that better bottom line. Again, sometimes we can find things that are a little bit cheaper somewhere else, but overall, is it going to be cheaper to go with one prime vendor? And we can even look at the same thing when we're talking about our own purchasing behaviors when we look at our own groceries. It may be cheaper to buy carrots at one grocery store and milk at another grocery store, but you have to factor in other things such as the time driving there, the gas and transportation costs getting to the other store. Is it really worth the small savings? And, in some cases it may be yes, but in other cases, your bottom line won't be any better from, going to that other store. So keep those things in mind when we're looking at price. Obviously, you want to find a supplier that you're comfortable with, that it's inspected, is reputable, it's going to meet your needs, easy to deal with. So all those things definitely play a role. And, the schedule of delivery is important. When can they deliver? Can they, come when your staff are available? Are they consistent with their delivery? Sometimes, you've seen some vendors who are all over the place. They're not able to give a good, accurate estimation, and that can be difficult to plan for in your operation. So you want to make sure you find a reliable one that has a good schedule of deliveries that meets your needs for your operation. So let's take a second to look at specs, as we call them, or specifications. And this is a quality statement that lists what requirements must be met in order for a product to be acceptable. So, you can see an example here if you're following along in your book on page 425 or figure 24.1 that gives an example of what a spec form may look like. And again, this is kind of just that format for what you may use for that in your operation. So obviously you want to include your product name, not necessarily the brand name. In some cases you may need a specific brand, and then that's okay. But if we're putting, if we really put Kleenex, maybe we really don't necessarily need Kleenexes. We really just want, some kind of facial tissue. So put that down so you get an accurate bid on what you're really looking for. Again, a description of what you're looking for. Do you want sliced, chopped, canned, fresh, frozen? As specific as you can be. And, in some cases, there may not be that many differences, but there are some products where there are hundreds of different types of that product. So you really need to be specific for what you're looking for. The specific quality that you're requesting. And sometimes that has to do with what you're going to do with that product. And they talk about olives in your book. So, if I needed olives for a bar or something where you wanted really pretty olives, they're going in a drink, they're going to be very visible. That may be something where you need a little bit higher quality than an olive that you're going to chop up and put in a marinade or on a dressing or something like that. So thinking about that quality that you're requesting based on what you're using those for. And they even talk about in your book how you may request 2 different kinds of olives because you may need 2 different qualities and have 2 different purposes for them in your operation. Obviously the size that you would like it in. Sometimes you're thinking about, do I want big, large number 10 cans of this? And if you're using a lot of it, maybe yes. But if it's something that you only open up small amounts at a time, maybe you want it in a smaller quantity size so you don't have to deal with the leftovers and storing that. So you have to think about what size would be best for your operation as well. And then other things as far as, product dating, as what temperature do you need to receive it at? Other things like that you may need to think about. You can even look at edible trim, the style that you want it to be in, all those things. So there are a lot of options that you can go through when you're doing the specs. The biggest thing you want to do is just put as much information as you can so that the person really, on the other side of that, if you're giving this to a vendor, hey, I need this product, what can you get me, is able to best give you an accurate price quote and get you what you need. Again, we looked at can sizes on that, so you can see a little bit more of the common can sizes in figure 24.2, so familiarize yourself with that. We commonly see a number 300 can at home. A number 10 can is really common for large portions, as a lot of our fruits and vegetables. So knowing what can size you're ordering is important, especially with recipes. Sometimes recipes say 1 can of this or 2 cans of this. What does that mean? What size are they using? So you may have to be a little bit more specific in those instances. And that goes back to when we were doing our recipe writing and our SOPs and process writing for our recipe preparation. And that's why it's important to be as specific as possible in those things, so that someone knows what you're talking about when you're saying 1 can of peaches go in this recipe. What does that mean? Again, branded menu items are not necessarily essential. They're normally more expensive, but they're becoming a trend, and some examples would be like, Pizza Hut pizza being served in school. So they're not just saying they have pizza, they are specifically branding it as Pizza Hut pizza when they're marketing that. The hospital may serve Dunkin' Donuts coffee, etc. And a lot of times these are going to cost more. But does having these branded items bring an increase in sales of this specific product? The answer is yes, sometimes, no, sometimes. So you have to think that through, when you're deciding which of those items to purchase and if it is worth a little bit extra cost to get that branded item. You also are going to want to look at nutrition content. They kind of hide this at the end of this part. They don't talk too much about it in your book. But again, that's important. Specifically, do you need a low sodium version of this? Are you trying to stay within certain guidelines as far as nutrient level, fat level, things like that? So you may have to, consult the registered dietitian when trying to decide, what specific nutrition items do I need my products to line up with, and then go from there when you're deciding which products to choose. So we're going to briefly talk about grade. And grade is a rating that describes the quality and appearance characteristics of a product. So the inspection of meats is required, but grading is optional. The grading gives us some more information about the quality, the appearance, the marbling, different things like that. And we'll specifically look at beef as an example, but again, there are grades for lots of different things, and there's a worksheet up on D2L for you to look at that gives a little bit more information on some of those value-added labels, the grading, what those shields look like, etc. And here you can see the difference on that piece of meat with the inspection stamp compared to the grading stamp, and the grading stamp is that USDA Select. And I'll give you a little bit more information about that. But the USDA assigns those grading assignments based on the standards for each food product, so it's going to be different what those standards are. If you're talking about beef compared to chicken or compared to produce, etc. So here's a little bit more information just as an example of the quality grades that the USDA sets out for beef. So prime is the highest grade available for most of our beef, and that's going to be the really top cut that's sold to a lot of our upscale restaurants. Choice then is a lower level. This is available in most restaurants and grocery stores. Select then is a leaner choice, so there's less marbling. So it's leaner than choice or prime. And, but it is still, you can find it, right? It's still a common cut of beef that you may be able to find in the store. Our standard and commercial then is the lowest quality for restaurants and groceries. It's not, you wouldn't want to buy a standard or commercial, steak. So it's a lower quality of that beef on there. And then your utility, cutter, and canner grades, those are really those that, we don't see in their whole form. Those are used by food manufacturers to make ground beef, hot dogs, other processed meat foods on that. So you can see how the scale varies. And a lot of times what, quality you're going to get obviously is going to depend on your budget, but also what you're using for. You wouldn't get a expensive prime cut of meat and use that to make beef stew. So again, you're looking at what's the purpose of having the beef, what recipe am I going to use it in, and where, am I going to look at grading versus price, etc. So how do we evaluate products? How do we know what to use? And there are several things you can look at. There's can cutting procedure, which is procedure for sampling products for possible purchase on that. And sometimes they'll use that, kind of your sampling, right? Taste test, you've got several people, not just one at your operation. Normally they'll have several people who are involved, maybe a chef, a manager, purchasing individual. All those people can really review the product and rate them. And sometimes you can compare these on that. You want to serve a new blueberry muffin product. Well, can you, order 3 of these blueberry muffin products and compare them and see, which your staff likes better on that. You want to make sure the product meets your nutritional needs, like we talked about. So obviously that's really important. Sometimes you can use rating cards to help compare. If you've ever been at the grocery store and had 2 cans, and it can be sometimes kind of difficult. You're like, well, this one has more sugar, but this one has more salt, but this one, has this ingredient in it. And so it's sometimes not always easy to choose. So having those rating cards can really help kind of you visualize the differences between those products. You definitely want to look at yield as well when you're evaluating these products. So, if 1 can of, green beans has, a drain weight to where you get a lot more out of that can compared to another one, well, that may be something you want to look at. And figure 24.4 does a good job of showing you, kind of how you would look at drain weight compared to price, and then trying to use this to figure out which one's the better value, if the quality of those is equal. So that can really help you say, both these are equal quality, we'd be happy using both of these in our facility, so which one do we get the better bang for our buck for? And that's what drain weight can help you figure out. And it also gives you some idea of how much of that product you're going to need to make your specific recipe. So there are several different vendors, there are several ways we can buy our food for our organization. And again, we're not just talking about food, I shouldn't say that. You also have other things you're purchasing, dry goods, cleaning supplies, those kind of things. So you really have to think about what's going to make the most sense. We have what's called group purchasing organization. And these are some contract buying programs that negotiate favorable pricing for their members. And sometimes these can be really helpful. A lot of times it's a group of facilities that kind of band together to negotiate with the prime vendor. And again, sometimes you can get a better price when these groups get together to negotiate these prices. Again, multiple vendor processes is also something that is common. And again, you can look at that as competitive bidding, and it's asking multiple vendors to submit quotes. And sometimes you can submit a whole purchase order. Here's what our week purchase order would look like. Can you give me a quote for what this would cost? And then compare those. And then obviously you're going back and looking at the other things we talked about with purchasing as far as with your vendor. Can they deliver it to you on time? Are they reliable, etc.? Even if one's slightly cheaper, but they're, going to deliver at a really bad time, is that worth it? So you have to think about some of those things when reviewing those bidding processes. But again, you want to make it, like we talked about with the specs, as clear to those organizations submitting the bids on exactly what you're looking for so you can get the most accurate bid for that. Obviously, you can, purchase items from the local grocery store. A lot of people like that to shop local, but this can be, often in smaller quantities. So smaller organizations may use this, or if there's, small amounts of some product that they need or last minute things. It may be easier to run over last minute and grab, some more strawberries from the grocery store than it is to get a vendor to deliver it. But again, you're just going to have to balance that out with your needs and costs and budget. There are a lot of independent specialty vendors for special products. Some restaurants may have separate suppliers for certain coffee or, seafood or other things like that. So, there are some, items that you may use in these cases that, are going to draw individuals to your operation, or, you're using them for another specific reason. They're local. You want to have a really high, fresh quality bakery roll that you don't feel like your, Cisco or U.S. Foods vendor is going to provide you, and you want that fresh baked one from a local bakery next door. And, so all of those things are reasons why you may use one of those independent specialty vendors. There are some things to talk about. So let's talk about rebates and incentives first of all. There are some rebates and incentives that are available for, purchasing a certain amount from this organization, or, if you're allowing them to prime vendor, if you're getting most of your stuff from them, they may give you a discount on things. There are manufacturer's rebates available. So, make sure you're looking into those to get the best value you can for your organization. There's also a thing called the anti-kickback safe harbors. And this is actually a regulation by the Department of Health and Human Services. And it's really to prevent kickbacks, or a bribe, right? You don't want some organizations to take a bribe or give a bribe for that. So you want to prevent those as well. And vendors have to be careful. There are some things that they can offer to their organizations to help them want to choose them. But you have to be careful, that it isn't appearing to be some kind of bribe to that organization. So we've purchased everything we need. So what do we do with it? How do we keep track of it? And sometimes I see this is the hardest part, or I'll see people who purchase okay, but they're not really sure what they have. And so obviously that makes it very difficult to efficiently manage your budget and utilize things well. So some terms with this for inventory management. So inventory valuation is that dollar figure or value of all inventory on hand at a given time. Some places couldn't even tell you this. They may not have a good record keeping system, and they may not be able to tell you this at this time. But it's important to have this on hand and be able to document this. So there are several ways that we can do this. So there's a minimum maximum system, and figure 24.7 gives you a little visual of this, where it's looking at like a a gas gauge almost example. But the minimum maximum system is an inventory system where levels are maintained within established ranges. So what does that mean? You know, maybe we need to keep between 5 and 8 cases of this product on hand at all time. So we never want to get more than 8, but we never want to go lower than 5. And that's how we're going to try to use our inventory system. And I'll pull this up on the next page, but if you look at figure 24.8, they have an example of what that may look like. So lead time is how long it's going to take from the time an order is placed until it arrives. So unlike going to the grocery store, you know, we don't get instant gratification with most of our vendors to where it's, you know, you order this and, you know, it may be delivered next week, it may be delivered in 2 days. Again, it may depend on what your normal delivery days are, so all of those things you need to keep in mind. Other thing you want to think about when deciding how much to order is usage rate. How much of this product is typically used per day, per week, per month, whatever you're looking at that with. Some other things to look at, another way to do this is the PAR level, and that's a minimum quantity to maintain in an inventory. So, you know, again, that PAR level concept is set for each inventory item. You know, after each count, then you can figure out, you know, okay, you know, we want to keep 15 of this item on hand. We just did an inventory. We only have 12, so we need to order more to get it up to that 15 level that we want to keep. Some other things to look at, a perpetual inventory is a running count of inventory that is updated continuously. You know, so again, that kind of works like the bank checkbook. Your book describes it, what I like. So you're keeping, you know, continuous updates of how much you have of this item. So when a product is used, you subtract it. And this takes a lot of organization. It can be really beneficial. But again, it does take a lot of organization, not only on a manager's part, but also of staff as they're using items. A physical inventory then is a physical count of items that occurs weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, depending on what you're looking at. So it's going around, that may be what some of you may think of when you hear inventory, going around and counting and seeing what's there. And obviously that's important. And, you know, even if you have that perpetual inventory system, you still are going to have to do that physical inventory on a regular basis, whatever that means to you. Because there's other things that, you know, take into account, so there could be waste, etc. So we want to do that physical inventory to make sure everything's lining up. So let's look about that 24.8 figure here. So just this example, you're setting values for canned stewed tomatoes and a minimum maximum inventory system. Tomatoes are purchased in number 10 cans, and you get 6 cans per case, and so you are buying it in that case as that purchase unit. So the maximum quantity you want to have is 6. The minimum quantity you want to have is 4. And it takes 3 days to receive the product. If you use 1 case per day, again, so that's their estimate. General use is about 1 case every day. Again, that's important to know. So then you're going to have to take that into account. So the lead unit is the lead time multiplied by usage rate. So we know it's going to take 3 days to get to us, and we are using about 1 per day. So that's about 3 cases that we need to know of that lead unit. So if the order for stewed tomatoes was placed today, we will use another 3 cases while we're waiting for this order to arrive. Now I think only keeping a maximum of 6 and a minimum of 4 on hand when you use 1 case per day seems a little bit low to me, but here, that's the example, so keep that in mind. Again, then if you're trying to decide how much to buy, so if we have 5 cases of stewed tomatoes in stock, then I know my current quantity is 5 cases, you know, and I want to make sure, you know, I have at least 6 cases. I'm trying to get to that, or not at least 6, I want at least 4, but I'm going to keep that at 6 if I'm looking at the maximum to order. So I've got, you know, 5 cases minus 3, so I've got my current quantity minus my lead units. So that's going to be, you know, 5 cases that I have on hand. I know by the time this order gets to me, I'm going to have used 3. So I would have only 2 left then when it gets to me. So if I order 6, I'll have used 2, and then, I'll actually have 4 on that. So I'm going to want to order 4 cases of stewed tomatoes today to ensure that I have enough to get where I want to go. So I want to have 6. After I use the 3 that I'm going to use by the time the order gets there, I'll only have 2 left. So I'll still have 2 on the shelf. I want my shelf to stay at 6. So I'm going to have 4 cases. That way when that arrives, those 4 cases plus those 2 left over that I haven't used in these 3 days will equal that 6 cases that I want to have on hand. Some other things that you're going to need to look at, shrinkage is the decline or loss in inventory count, so anything other than taking it out and using. So someone drops a jar of food and it breaks. You have food waste, personal use, you didn't receive all your order. Anything like that is counted in shrinkage. So you have to keep that in mind when you're doing inventory. It's really important to look at those, but also when you're planning. You can think about that, and sometimes it may be really small amounts that add up over time, especially if you're not receiving all of it. So just keep that in mind when you are looking at your supply, and that's why it's always important to go do a physical inventory, because even if your system says you have this much in, you want to make sure that that's all adding up. Another way to purchase is just-in-time purchasing. A lot of groups are wanting to keep as little inventory on hand as possible, but that can be challenging to make sure you have it when you need it. So again, they have the just-in-time purchasing, and really that concept is that the dietary manager would purchase the product just in time to use it. So, this is when you're going to have frequent deliveries, or some people will do this, especially if you have a lot of fresh produce or fresh product or specialty items. But it can be difficult to maintain a large operation with this method. Some terms that you need to know for inventory. So a few things. Inventory item is obviously that product itself. So what product are you talking about? That's really important to know for sure. The inventory category is in a grouping of products. That's logical. So, is it frozen foods? Is it produce? Is it dairy? How are these items grouped together? You also have to look at a purchase unit, and we'll talk about the difference between a purchase unit and an issue unit. So purchase unit is the package unit that a product comes in to your operation as. So, again, back to that example of the peaches that they talk about, they're in number 10 cans, but, the package unit is a case, which is 6 number 10 cans. That's the way you're buying it, based on your, specifications and the contract you set up with your vendor. So you're getting it in as that purchase unit, but then your issue unit could be different. So the package amount of the product is issued from inventory. So your issue unit, in that case, may be 1 number 10 can. Because you're issuing it, for breakfast service or whatever, they're going to pull it 1 can at a time from the inventory, and that's going to be your issue unit. Sometimes they're the same. Sometimes a purchase unit and an issue unit may be the same, but a lot of times they're different, especially when you're buying large volume of these products. Your storage areas, obviously that's where your inventory is stored, so it's important to have that organized, easy to access, defined areas for certain foods, and especially if that lines up with your inventory categories, that can be really helpful to manage that inventory and have a good idea of what you have. And that inventory list is going to be that current, complete, up-to-date list of what you have for those products. You want to know where it's at, what unit it's going to be found in, etc. There are a couple other methods of analysis as well, and the ABC analysis when you're looking at inventory management is the method of categorizing items based on cost to determine where to focus the most energy as far as reducing cost. So products that are the most costly may be identified as A. We may really want to monitor the quantity of these. Maybe this is in a locked storage room. And sometimes they'll do this for alcoholic beverages, certain equipment that's expensive, things like that, that may really be costly to the organization to replace. And then you're going to have B, that's the next most costly, and the least costly is C. And again, you're just trying to kind of rank how strict or how much importance you want to place on controlling costs for those items. Obviously, it's important to try to control our costs for all of the items that we purchase, but this is one specific way for really expensive items in our inventory. Ways to reduce our inventory costs in general: adjust amounts ordered and make sure your purchase units are ideal for what you need. If you're really just not using as much peaches, maybe you don't need to buy them in as large of quantities as you've been buying them. So keep those in mind. You can streamline products that are carried and manage the menu. This is a really big one I see, and sometimes I'll see restaurants that fail for this reason because they have so many products in their inventory. They'll have a different sauce for all of their sandwiches, or something to where if they streamlined it a little bit and maybe had half of those sauces, or half of the salad dressings, or whatever that's going to look like, they may be able to reduce the number of products that they're carrying and manage their menu a little bit better with that. And again, you may need to examine the need for specialty items. Do you need all of them? And in some cases the answer is going to be yes, but there may be some that you don't necessarily need to keep on hand. Some other things you want to think about: issuing. So what is the process for withdrawing food items from storage? Who has access? Is it any one of your staff members can walk back? Is there specific staff members who have key or the ability to go in there? Is it controlled by management? What does that look like? And sometimes you may have different methods for issuing, based kind of on that ABC analysis. Maybe all of your staff can get most of the BC, but maybe management is responsible for unlocking and controlling those really expensive equipment and items. So keep that in mind. And then food requisition is going to be a document for specific food items and quantities, and sometimes this is used as an organization to request items from inventory. So maybe someone's in charge of that. And again, you'll see this mostly in a large operation. That way the management can control who is requesting and what are our employees gathering from that inventory and storage area. Quickly, let's talk about receiving. So firstly, your trained staff should always be available to accept deliveries. You want staff to be able to ensure that you receive the correct products, that you got the correct quantity that you ordered, that the specifications have been met for each product, that you didn't order whole olives and get sliced olives, and that's not going to work for what you need. So you really need someone who understands your menu and what you're looking for and what you're going to do with those products, to really be able to look at these items and make sure you got what you requested. Obviously, you want to make sure that the deliveries are meeting food safety requirements as well. So it's delivered, without signs of pests, at the correct temperature, it's being stored properly. So your staff should be able to look at all of these things and ensure that they're being received in a safe and accurate way. Your staff should know how to keep records of orders received and what to do if a product isn't correct. So, how do they send back product? Are they good at keeping a record of what they're receiving, what they put in, signed receipts, those kind of things. So keep that in mind. And again, this doesn't have to be all of your staff that know how to do this, and you don't probably want all of them unless you're a small kitchen and you really, and you've really, feel like all of your staff are capable of this. But you want to make sure that, whoever is doing the receiving has been trained and knows what to expect. Obviously your receiving area should also have appropriate equipment, supplies, food scales, tools to open containers, food thermometers, if you need any carts or containers to hold ice, all those things you may want to have around in that appropriate receiving area. And really, you want to make sure you have enough space. And sometimes that's out of your control, but you don't want deliveries to end up on the floor while you're trying to sort them and things like that, because that would be awful if the health inspector walked in right at that point. But you really want to make sure you have enough space to maneuver these things around properly. Some other purchasing considerations to look at, purchase orders are important for accurate orders. We'll look at more of that in a second. When you're deciding how much to purchase, you want to look at product yields, is there shrinkage, especially when we're looking at meat, etc. And also you want to think about, should you make or buy? Is it worth your time to make broth? Is it worth your employees' time to make the rolls, or should you just buy the rolls? So they're going to have to think about that. Consider food costs, labor costs, the skills of your employees, the space available to you in your operation. And all of those things are going to come together to make the best decision for your facility on whether you should make or buy that option. Obviously, you want to follow ethical procedures. We don't want to break any of our kickback rules. No padding the invoices, fictitious companies. You hear all the time about people embezzling money and things like that. So obviously, we don't want to do that. But it's important to keep adequate records for purchasing, so we're ensuring that none of this is happening. Sometimes duplicate invoices will get paid on accident, so you want to make sure that a good organization system is in place to make sure you're paying the right amount for our invoices. And you want to make sure your vendors aren't doing any quality substitutions. You're paying for a certain grade of meat, that you don't want to make sure they're giving you a lower grade. So you want someone in that receiving area who knows what they're doing and can look for the best options on this. So purchase order, again, is that business document specifying what is being purchased. A lot of operations now have an online purchase system where you're not necessarily submitting them this, but you can go on and in their website, kind of, type in your order and select what you want to buy. There are even some mobile apps. There are things you can scan. So they've come a long way on that. But this is kind of a sample purchase order. So if I needed 30 pounds of Gala apples and they're $1.49 a pound, it's going to be about $44.70. And this is kind of what I would like you to do for your assignment. Whole carrots, they're 25 pounds. Well, they're sold to me in 5-pound bags. So, it's going to cost me $4.99 per 5-pound bag, and I need 5 5-pound bags, and so my cost is going to be $25.95. And a lot of options, you'll have to look at this too. What if you only needed 23 pounds of carrots, but your vendor only sells them in 5-pound bags? Your cost is still going to be $25.95 because you're going to have to order that 25 pounds. So when you're deciding on how much you're needing, the unit is really important to keep in mind. Peaches in juice on this, so I'm specifying that. So we have 6 number 10 cans that are needed, and it just so happens that one case is 6 cans, so that worked out well. But again, same thing with the carrots. If we only needed 5 cans, but I had to buy them in a case, well then, my cost is still going to be that $28.75. Chicken breast, again, that's pretty straightforward. If it was 40 pounds, $3.39 a pound, you can see the cost there. Yellow onions, 20 pounds. They're sold in 10-pound bags to me, and so I know I'm going to need 2 of those, so my cost is $19.98. So again, those are really important to think about. So when you're doing your purchase order for your facility, you can use this template as a way that you can turn that in. It doesn't have to look exactly like this at all, but it's an idea of kind of what we're looking for there. Again, here's another sample purchase order that I just wanted to show you. This one is actually not for food. You can see it's for some chemicals and other aids like that. But you can see what it might look like in real life, where you've got order number, date, when you expect it, who it was ordered for, who it was ordered by, the company name you're ordering it for, contact information, all of that kind of thing needs to be on there. Again, because that's going to give information to your supplier. It's good for your records, all that kind of stuff. All right, and when we're looking at purchasing, we obviously need to pay for what we're purchasing. So there's several ways to look at that. The invoice is a document that designates what has been purchased and accepted. So again, you're purchasing and receiving individual. So whoever's there with receiving, theoretically, if it's a big delivery, a lot of times they'll use the invoice to accept items and make sure it's all there. Other invoices for certain items or services may be just sent directly to your purchasing or accounts payable individual. So however those are done, you need to have an organized system. A statement then is a document that summarizes all invoices, credits, and payments for a given time period, whether that's month, week, year. A lot of times you'll see monthly statements in these cases. You want to make sure the invoices are reviewed and paid in a timely manner. That can obviously cause problems with some of your vendors if they're not paid on time. So keep that in mind. And spending should be tracked. And if you look at page 455, they've got a great example of a spend down tracker that is a spreadsheet essentially that as you're going through the purchasing cycle, you can add in what you're purchasing, and then it can deduct that from the monthly budget so you know how much you have left to spend. So it's kind of, again, just a way to keep track as we're going to make sure we're not spending way too much in the first 2 weeks, then we have nothing left for the last 2 weeks of the month. So that can be helpful. So make sure you have some way to keep track of that in your operation. So that was quick purchasing 101. Again, there's a lot more that goes on with purchasing, but it's a great introduction. And as you work more in the industry, you'll learn more about these purchasing processes. And I encourage you to ask questions of management or other staff that you work at if you're not that familiar with it. Even if you're not involved in this on a daily basis, ask. See what they do for purchasing.